CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. UK inflation falls below double figures for the first time since August, but food prices continue to rise at the fastest rate in 45 years.
Our other headlines: Russia vows a harsh response to attacks on its Belgorod region as both Ukraine and the United States deny any involvement.
Fighter jets and clashes reported in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, on the second day of a new ceasefire.
And the race for the White House. Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis is expected to announce his presidential bid in the coming hours.
The UK has posted a sharp fall in inflation, but not by as much as expected.
Over the past year, inflation in Britain has hit levels not seen in decades.
Our correspondent Li Jinhua has been looking at the numbers. Jinhua.
Yes, indeed. The annual rate fell in April to 8.7%, down from 10.1% in March. The first time it's hit single figures since August last year. But it doesn't mean prices are coming down yet. They are just not rising as fast as they were. The main reason for the drop: energy prices, which have slowed significantly from last year's highs. And below the surface, the news is not so good. Figures show some core inflation, which excludes energy and food prices, rising to a 31-year high of 6.8%. And food prices continue to surge, with the cost of groceries up 19.1% from a year ago, the second highest rate in over 45 years. Staples like sugar, milk and pasta were up sharply.
Li Jinhua, thank you very much. Well, let's talk now to Mark Oswald, who's Chief Economist and Global Strategist with ADM Investor Services International. Good to see you again, Mark. Welcome back to the programme. So looking at this headline figure for inflation, that shows a fall, but not as much as had been hoped, and core inflation is up. So what's going on?
Well, I think the one I was a bit surprised by just how bad some of the forecasts for this were. A lot of this is what one would call state-mandated prices. So we had the very unwise decision, when one looks at it in the context of this particular data, to defer the annual hike in rail fares to this month, which obviously is a huge increase. We've also got communications coming through, because that always happens, which basically means mobile phone charges. It's an unhappy confluence of things, but things which were not to be unanticipated. The problem is at that core level, but a lot of these things come through at the core level, particularly things like mobile phone charges and rail fares. So it is, the Bank of England will be uncomfortable with the 6.8% in core. However, there is, between now and the next Central Bank of England meeting, another set of CPI data which may actually look rather better than this particular set.
So core inflation doesn't include things like energy or food price inflation. That's, of course, still very high. People are going to find it hard to manage these rises, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, it doesn't, this is not to take away from the fact that, the rise in inflation that we've had, the cumulative rise, is putting enormous amount of pressure on households. The Tussell Trust has basically said there were about 3 million households needing assistance last year from food banks. That's a horrendous figure for a developed world country, though I have to say it's also true in a number of other countries like the US and indeed in places like Germany.
So you're saying that there are some more figures coming up that will need to be taken into account, but what does all this mean for monetary policy?
Well, for the time being, as far as financial markets go, they expect now, instead of anticipating that there might be one more rate hike in June, which had been gradually edging up to another rate hike after that in July. Now we're actually factoring in the idea that interest rates may rise from the current 4.5% to 5.25%. I think actually, as we go through the summer, the news will get better on inflation, and that actually won't come to pass. But for the time being, that's what financial markets are discounting.
We've had the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey admitting that the central bank's economic model had not been accurate and that there were very big lessons to learn. What lessons are we learning, do you think?
Well, I think, given the amount of disruption in the world, relying on models to predict things as much as it's helpful is probably not a good idea, and particularly this assumption which was revealed yesterday in their testimony that they assumed that prices would come down as quickly as they went up. There is no logical reason to make that assumption, particularly in a world which is so full of many disruptions to supply chains. You just can't make that sort of prediction. And therefore, basing your monetary policy on that assumption, you should really be looking for greater intelligence from businesses, from consumers, to get a better feel for how prices are going to develop.
So when you look at these UK inflation numbers in a wider context, Britain now has the highest inflation rate of the G7 countries, along with Italy. What's it doing wrong?
I don't think it's really a case of what it's doing wrong. It's in a number of cases. It's what the structures are. In the UK, the biggest problem is, one, it's the increase in taxes that we've had doesn't help things. The fact that no one's really set out no one's sorted out a lot of the problems due to increased customs checks in the UK as a result of Brexit. That's an extra cost which has to be factored into businesses planning, and that's really where a lot of the problems lie, and also the shortage of labour, so that as people are wanting to hire, they're having to pay even more in the way of wages.
Mark, good to get your thoughts today. Thank you very much for joining us. That's Mark Oswald from ADM Investor Services International.
Oil prices are higher for a third day running. That's after the Saudi energy minister warned speculators to watch out. His comments come just a week before OPEC members meet to review output quotas. Oil prices are also being supported by data this week which showed US stockpiles shrinking.
Facebook's parent company Meta has lost a court fight with European Union regulators. Meta wanted to block regulators' demands for large amounts of data to help build an antitrust case against the social network giant in a case that dates back 3 years. The court ruled that the company failed to prove the request for information went beyond what was needed. Meta says it's considering its options.
Netflix has expanded its crackdown on password sharing to its major markets in countries like the United States, the UK and Australia. Emails are being sent to customers telling them to pay out an additional fee if they wish to share accounts with people outside their households. The streaming giant enforces the rule by making devices check in with the customer's home IP address around about once a month.
Richard Branson's space company Virgin Orbit has been shut down with its assets sold for around $36 million. The company filed for bankruptcy protection in April after failing to secure new funding. It comes just months after its first ever satellite launch in the UK ended in failure, with the rocket falling short of its target orbit.
The owner of Jaguar Land Rover looks set to pick Britain for a multi-billion-pound electric car battery plant, according to a report by the BBC. Tata Motors is said to have chosen the UK over Spain, with the company's boss expected to fly to London next week to finalise the deal. It could lead to the creation of around 9,000 jobs at the factory in Somerset in the southwest of England.
China's new ambassador to the United States says he hopes the relationship between the two countries can improve. Xie Feng takes up the role amid continuing friction on trade, technology and geopolitics. He says there are serious challenges ahead.
Obviously, there are profound differences between the two countries, and the relationship is faced with serious difficulties and challenges. Then this relationship has gone through many twists and turns in the past half-century, yet it has always been able to move ahead. The relationship is too important for us to let it fail. Neither side can change or replace the other. Working together, both will come out as winners. Fighting each other, both will lose. And the world will be hurt as well.
Well, a fascinating time to be starting this new job, because the new ambassador's arrival comes as the 2024 United States presidential race starts to heat up. Let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett in New York. Tell us about Ron DeSantis then, the man who's about to launch his campaign in just a few hours.
Yeah, this is our big story here in North America today. You know, Ron DeSantis is the Republican governor of the state of Florida, the Sunshine State in the south of the country. And he rocketed to fame in the course of the last couple of years because of the way he handled COVID-19. So in Florida, he got rid of the mask mandate quicker than almost anywhere else. He reopened schools quicker than almost anywhere else and reopened beaches as well. And that made him a Republican hero. So that's how he went from being governor of Florida to somebody who's considered for the presidency of the United States. Now, having said that, it's very important to understand he is still far, far behind former President Trump in the polls, taken among Republicans who must pick a candidate to go up against Joe Biden next year in 2024. And indeed, Trump is 36 points ahead of Ron DeSantis as we speak at the moment. But he is very popular, is Ron DeSantis. You can't get away from it. He has a made-for-TV family, a lovely wife, lovely kids, all that sort of stuff, which you actually need for American presidential races, really. However, it has become apparent in recent weeks that he doesn't have much of a personality, and that might actually hinder him as he goes forward. He's going to position himself in about 6 hours' time as Trump without the baggage. That's what he's going to do. He's going to say, I'm just like President Trump with all my views and beliefs. However, I don't bring all the nonsense that comes with it. And he's going to do that at 22 hours GMT, so just under 6 hours now. He's going to do it on Twitter, and alongside him will be the boss of Twitter, Elon Musk, asking him questions. And I think that this is the first real swipe at President Trump, really, because remember, President Trump has 80 million followers on Twitter, but he doesn't go there. I think he will have to if he pursues his ambition to be the president again. But for the time being, he sticks to Truth Social, which is the Republican social media site. And Trump does that because he feels that the donors for the party are on Truth Social rather than on Twitter. But one thing I can promise you is that this is going to be a very, very bitter race between these two men. It's going to get nasty. And just to finish those thoughts off, he's entering a very crowded field. There are already 5 others contending to be the Republican presidential hopeful. This will be the 6th. The first TV debate for them is in August. The votes begin in February of 2024. And DeSantis has very, very conservative views on abortion and LGBTQ rights. You know him overseas for his recent argument with Disney. And President Biden, who will be up against one of these Republican contenders, is betting that all of them, but particularly these two men, Trump and DeSantis, do not have sufficient national appeal in order to win the presidential in November 2024.
Now, John, we can't see you without asking, what's the latest on the debt ceiling?
This is the other big story, and it is beginning now to loom large in the rearview mirror, as it were. I mean, there's a basic problem. Let me just, in one sentence, explain. America's credit card has reached its limit. Think of it like that. Only the Congress can raise that limit so that they can go on spending. The rights and wrongs of this we could debate all day. I mean, they're going to have to do something about this because this issue crops up every year. But here's the latest twist in all this. Nobody believes the deadline, okay? Not the politicians themselves in Washington, D.C., especially the Republican Party, not Wall Street, where I am, just around the corner from, and not really the media either. That is your basic problem. And even Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, has talked about a June 1st deadline. But last weekend, she was talking, oh, maybe we'll have to start, not paying some bills around about the 8th or the 9th. So when you say that, there's no firm deadline. And as you know, a firm deadline really focuses the mind. Well, speaking within the past few minutes, the leading Republican, Kevin McCarthy, who's the Speaker of the House, has been talking about how he has been dealing with President Biden. They are still talking today. Both sides, two much revered teams, are meeting as we speak. And Kevin McCarthy says, basically, President Biden took 97 days to take this issue seriously. And his main message over and over again was, you cannot spend You must spend less than you did last year. That's the message over and over again. He keeps saying, no household can spend more this year than they did last year if they haven't got the money. So that's the message from the Republicans. The risk is that extremists on both sides will allow this to go to a default. The Republicans, because they're being told to by President Trump, and the Democrats, because they're absolutely opposed to any spending cuts whatsoever. Now, the Wall Street people are at last catching up with this as we loom towards that deadline, which is still 8 days away. Plenty of time. But Wall Street is down today 260 points, about 0.8%, because there seems to be no progress as we head into a major long weekend. Monday in America is Memorial Day, just like it is the Whit holiday in Europe.
John, thank you for that. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. NATO's chief says Ukraine's membership of the military alliance is not on the agenda until the war is over.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe.
Ukraine says the 9-month battle for the besieged city of Bakhmut is far from over. Kyiv says its forces have made gains against Russia on the edge of the city. This all comes as Moscow claims to have captured Bakhmut. Meanwhile, Britain's Defence Minister Ben Wallace has been visiting Kyiv, where he vowed Ukraine's allies would not be divided.
The international community will only get stronger in their opposition to this aggression. We will always be standing by Ukraine, and not only through this war, but long afterwards.
Russia has promised a harsh response after releasing images which it claims show US-made military vehicles were used in an attack on its territory. Pictures show damaged Western armoured trucks, including US Humvees. Some Ukrainian military experts say that the pictures are staged. Fighting has been taking place in the Russian border region of Belgorod over the past 2 days. Russia blames Ukrainian insurgents and says the group has been defeated, with at least 70 killed. The United States has denied involvement, as has Kyiv, which says the attacks were launched by Russian opposition paramilitary groups. Well, our correspondent Stuart Smith is in Moscow. So, Stuart, conflicting reports over what's going on in Belgorod. What does Russia say?
Yeah, well, and when it comes to whether these are or are not indications of US weapons being used against Russian territory and Russian civilians, the Kremlin says it's made its mind up, that it believes this is further evidence the US is involved in the so-called special military operation. But the US says, sure, it supplies weapons to Ukraine, it supplies armoured vehicles just like the ones found in the photos released by the Kremlin, but it has made it clear to Kyiv that these vehicles are not to be used for any kind of activity outside of Ukraine. Of course, Kyiv says that it wasn't the Ukrainian armed forces that were participating in this incursion earlier in the week. Regardless, it has gone some way more to deteriorate Russia-US relations, according to the Kremlin. In terms of what's going on now in Belgorod, the Russian Ministry of Defense has made it clear the counter-terror operation is over. Now a local governor says it's about getting people back into homes and also reconnecting them to the gas supply system. 500 buildings were damaged, according to the Belgorod governor.
And Stuart, Russia reporting that one of its warships has been attacked by Ukraine in the Black Sea. What more do we know?
Yeah, well, the Russian Ministry of Defense says key here that it was unsuccessful. It suggests that 3 unmanned speedboats headed for this Russian Black Sea Fleet vessel. It's a reconnaissance vessel, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, but before the speedboats could hit the ship, it was intercepted and destroyed. Now, Ukraine hasn't commented yet, so we don't know its version of events when it comes to this, but Moscow says the ship was there in a reconnaissance role in order to protect 2 gas pipelines that go from Russia to Turkey, so are suggesting that this is a further reason for it to be very careful about making any kind of concessions and any kind of negotiation about the renewal of the Black Sea grain deal, which is supposed to demilitarize the Black Sea and keep civil operations safe from any part in the special military operation.
Stuart, thank you very much. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow.
Well, China is stepping up mediation talks on the Ukraine conflict, with Special Representative Li Hui meeting senior officials in France, the latest stop on his diplomatic tour of Europe. He's hoping to negotiate a ceasefire following his visit to Ukraine last week. Our correspondent Natalie Malhas is in Paris.
Central to the agenda here on the continent is those peace talks bringing about a swift resolution to the conflict in Ukraine. Li Hui is one of the most senior representatives of China to touch down in Kyiv just last week. This week he was in France, and part of his itinerary, we understand, visits to Poland and Germany, among others. China has centered itself as mediator in the conflict playing out in Ukraine at the moment, pushing for a ceasefire and also continuing its push for a political solution to the crisis playing out in Ukraine. We know from his meeting with the Director General in the Foreign Affairs Office in France this week that both China and France have agreed on some fundamental points around the conflict in Ukraine, including Ukraine's right to self-defense, its independence and territorial integrity, but central to the agenda and all the talking points that will be playing out over the next few days is that of peace, brokering a swift, just and fair peace deal in Ukraine between those 2 warring parties.
China's President Xi Jinping has met Russia's visiting Prime Minister in Beijing. Mikhail Mishustin says ties with China are at an unprecedented high. Our correspondent Lusa Ray reports.
Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin just landed in Beijing last night. And this morning, Chinese Premier Li Qiang held a ceremony to welcome Mishustin's official visit in China, and Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng and also Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang also attended the ceremony. And after the ceremony, Li Qiang held talks with Mishustin. In the afternoon, Chinese President Xi Jinping also met with Mishustin at the Great Hall of the People. And Xi Jinping said China will support Russia on issues relating to core interests, and the 2 should fully discover economic growth points together and potentials for further cooperation. And Mishustin said Russia is willing to deepen cooperation with China and also to create a multipolar world together with China based on international law. And after the meeting with Xi, Mishustin laid a wreath at the monument to the people's heroes.
Well, Ukraine's membership of NATO is not on the agenda while Russia's war against Kyiv continues. So says the head of the military alliance, Jens Stoltenberg, in Brussels. Ukraine made a bid for fast-track membership of the alliance last year, but Western countries have been wary it could inflame tensions with the Kremlin and see an escalation of the conflict. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels. Alex, what might this mean for Ukraine's NATO prospects?
Well, Jamie, quite simply, it means no peace, no membership. That is the clear message from Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary-General of NATO, today. It's not the first time he said this, but it's certainly interesting timing to repeat that statement after President Zelensky did a tour of European allies and most recently the G7 summit in Japan to garner more support and bolster that Western support. Jens Stoltenberg making it clear that without a peaceful resolution, there is no way Ukraine's membership can move forward. Now, this is also a choice by the Secretary-General and by NATO. There is no hard rule in the NATO treaty that says that a country in conflict cannot join the alliance. But one thing that the NATO Secretary-General is acutely aware of is that any membership has to be approved unanimously by all NATO members, and a lot of members would be a little bit weary, a little bit sheepish, as you said, when it comes to adding any members to enter to the NATO alliance that is involved in an active conflict, or in this case an active invasion. So that's one of the messages clearly by Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary-General. Moscow, as you said, warning that additional support to Ukraine, like those F-16s that we've been mentioning for the last few days, would bring into question NATO's involvement in this conflict. The Secretary-General again repeating the fact that NATO is not a party to this invasion, it's a war of aggression from Ukraine, and that it is not involved directly in the conflict. Now, responding to that NATO membership claim, Moscow being very critical of that, and Jens Stoltenberg saying it was really, frankly, none of their concern. Let's have a listen.
We all agree that NATO's door is open for new members, and that it is for the NATO allies and Ukraine to decide when they should join, not Moscow. They don't have a veto. And then we also agree that the most urgent and important task now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign independent nation. Because if Ukraine doesn't prevail, then there is no membership issue to discuss.
So, Jamie, all eyes on that Ukrainian counter-offensive that we've been expecting for weeks now. That will be deciding in inspiring and changing European and Western support of Ukraine. It'll be looked at very closely by a lot of European allies. That counter-offensive will be crucial in its ability to lead to a ceasefire or more discussions and negotiations. So that will be a crucial factor to look at in the next few weeks. An interesting anecdote, Jamie, on this particular issue of NATO membership. George Robertson, the former head of NATO, who was in charge in the very, very start of the 21st century in the late 90s, early 2000s, said that at that time another country was interested in joining NATO, had expressed an interest, and that was Russia. That now seems a world away, Jamie.
Alex, elsewhere in Brussels, EU envoys discussing new sanctions against Russia. What more do we know?
Well, we've got a disagreement among member states. That is part of the nature of the European Union. Hungary, Greece, among others, have an issue with a blacklist that Ukraine has drawn up of companies that it claims are war sponsors. Now, these companies come from a variety of European countries, Hungary and Greece, of course, but also France, Belgium, Italy and others. And when discussions are ongoing about these new sanctions, Hungary and Greece have said, well, look, we want our companies to be removed from this name and shame list, this blacklist, if you will, until we move forward on these sanctions. To give you a sense of what they would look like, those sanctions will be focusing on closing loopholes on previous sanctions. We've seen exports into Russia increasing quite dramatically in Central Asian countries, for example, which is seen by the European Union as Russia and these countries circumventing existing sanctions. There's also a proposal of sanctioning 7 Chinese companies, which the European Union has accused of providing technology that can be used in military equipment by Russia. Now, these discussions will be ongoing. EU diplomats behind the scenes saying we're not expecting a resolution soon, but that we will get there eventually and in time. Jamie.
Alex, I don't know if you managed to hear the UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace being interviewed earlier on. He's in Kyiv and was assuring Kyiv's allies that NATO would not be divided. I mean, it's interesting he felt the need to make those comments. What is your sense there on the unity of NATO member countries?
Well, that can be seen in two ways. Either the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace had a sense that there was a need to publicly state NATO's unification, or it is just an example of how NATO works. Those decisions have to be made unanimously. We've seen that with Finland, with Sweden. If Turkey or Hungary have an issue with a new member joining the alliance, it doesn't move forward. So there is an element of debate, discussion. That is how the nature of the alliance works. So Ben Wallace there reiterating that. There are no massive disagreements at the moment when it comes to Ukraine's accession. There are disagreements on fast-tracking that accession. There are concerns that that might weaken the alliance and weaken the systems in place to maintain that alliance's strength. So certainly some disagreements, but not necessarily disunity at the heart of NATO, Jamie.
Alex, thank you for that. Our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Hundreds killed in Sudan and more than 1 million have fled. Now the unrest is spreading to neighbouring Chad.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. UK inflation falls below double figures for the first time since August. But food prices continue to rise at the fastest rate in 45 years.
Our other headlines, Russia vows a harsh response to attacks on its Belgorod region as both Ukraine and the United States deny any involvement.
Fighter jets and clashes have been reported in Sudan's capital, breaking a ceasefire after just 2 days. The week-long truce was meant to allow aid to be delivered and pave the way for a more lasting peace. The United Nations human rights chief says civilians are trapped in Khartoum and has urged the warring generals to stop what he called the senseless violence.
Well, hundreds of people have been killed since the fighting broke out over 5 weeks ago, and more than 1 million people have now fled the country.
Many have crossed into Chad, but the conflict has followed them, spilling over the border. It's prompted the Chadian government to boost security.
CGTN's correspondent Panina Karibe reports.
Khartoum is Chad's last frontier on the border with Sudan, but this small and sleepy trading center has generated a lot of attention in the country. Just last week, a rocket crossed over from Sudan and landed here.
There was a lot of fighting. People were fleeing and crossing over to this side. Some of the attackers fired a rocket at the people who were fleeing. Fortunately, it did not explode. It got lodged into the ground. If it had exploded, it would have caused a lot of damage in this town.
I'm at the Tendelti border. Sudan is less than a kilometer from here, where you see those many trees. That is actually Tendelti town in Sudan. And where I'm standing now is where that rocket landed. Khartoum town has now become a front line in a conflict it has nothing to do with. So far, those who have borne the brunt of the spillover from the conflict in Sudan are the most vulnerable.
In Khartoum, not far away from the border, in a town inside Chad, a few days ago we had an incident when one refugee was killed. So it is a huge concern that we have.
Khartoum is one of the 27 entry points along the Sudan-Chad border for the refugees. The Chadian government says it is doing its best to secure those entry points.
Due to the unfortunate incident which happened recently, we have decided to secure the border here in the east. We've taken all necessary measures to ensure security along the border is good.
Those assurances, however, have done little to quell the fears of those living in this town.
We are very scared. Even though it's quiet across the border, we don't know when it will flare up again and how it will affect us.
Yet another example of how the continuing conflict in Sudan is elevating the humanitarian crisis in Chad. Penina Karibe, CGTN, in Khartoum, Eastern Chad.
Israel's parliament has passed a new budget, bolstering Prime Minister Netanyahu after months of protests over his judicial reform plans. Netanyahu's hinted that his government could now revive the proposals, which were suspended in March. More protests are expected.
India has struck deals on migration and clean energy with Australia. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is visiting the country to discuss regional security and economic ties with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. They signed a plan making it easier for Indian students and business people to move to Australia and will set up a joint hydrogen task force to expand clean energy cooperation.
A 95-year-old woman who was tasered by Australian police at a care home has died. Claire Nowland, who had dementia, was critically hurt after police responded to reports that she was wandering around the home with a steak knife. Police say they're investigating.
The Spanish football club Valencia has been hit with a nearly $50,000 fine and the temporary closure of a section in its stadium after racist abuse aimed at the Real Madrid player Vinicius Jr. The Brazilian was subjected to alleged monkey chants from the crowd during a league game on Sunday. Valencia says the sanction is unfair and it will appeal.
Now, AI, and more AI. That pretty much sums up the theme of Microsoft Build, an annual conference for software engineers and web developers.
The tech giant says it wants to harness artificial intelligence quickly and safely. Our correspondent Mark New reports.
At Microsoft's annual Build Developer Conference, CEO Satya Nadella referenced a quote from the late Steve Jobs, that computers were the equivalent of a bicycle for our minds.
Last November, we got an upgrade, right? We went from the bicycle to the steam engine with the launch of ChatGPT. It was like the mosaic moment for this generation of the AI platform.
Microsoft's early investment and partnership with the creator of ChatGPT, OpenAI, has given them a jump in the AI race. Microsoft unveiled a new AI Copilot for the Windows operating system. Users can chat with the assistant, which can make recommendations and navigate through documents and apps instantly. OpenAI co-founder Greg Brockman appeared at Build, explaining how early versions of their tech that were made to follow instructions naturally called out to chat.
It had really generalized this idea of, well, if you really want me to follow instructions and you give me a new instruction, maybe you really want me to have a conversation. And so for me, that was the moment that it kind of clicked that, okay, we have this infrastructure that's already in place with earlier model and this new model, even just using this sort of technology that wasn't meant for chat, it wants to chat.
Another theme at the event is AI safety. Nearly all the major tech companies, including Microsoft, have dedicated pages like this one, Responsible AI. But Nadella says the real challenge is to make sure these safeguards aren't outside the engineering process, but rather built in to the everyday tool chain. Those tools are also finding their way into the next generation of AI experts. Microsoft's Imagine Cup is a worldwide competition for university tech students to win $100,000 and mentoring from Nadella himself. This year's 3 finalists are all using AI, including Eupnia, which has developed a mobile app to help students and doctors better diagnose and treat tuberculosis.
We have an accuracy of over 95%, which can be further drilled down to, the error could be drilled down to just 1% or 0.5%. Similarly, everywhere else in the world with AI, we are able to actually just cut down on the human error. AI is not going to replace, but is going to definitely assist the healthcare providers, because currently, I think with the pandemic, we saw how the healthcare sector had a breakdown all over the world.
They are really going all in on AI. They are really seeing the benefits and seeing how it can help them achieve what they want to achieve and also have an impact in their communities.
And winning this year's Imagine Cup crown was Tawi, a team from Kenya that uses AI to help kids with auditory processing disorders to overcome communication barriers. Mark Dew, CGTN, San Francisco.
Business leaders from Latin America are gathering in China to explore potential links with the tech giant Huawei.
At the event in Shenzhen, entrepreneurs are looking at how cloud computing could be used to boost economic growth. Our correspondent Xu Hua reports.
Latin American entrepreneurs are in Shenzhen for the Huawei Cloud Campus from Wednesday to Friday. As the digitization process in Latin America accelerates amid the post-pandemic economic recovery, local industries have begun to look east, hoping to seek new opportunities to partner with Chinese tech company Huawei.
The partnership with Huawei Cloud will allow us to create a super app to offer various services to our customers and thus promote the economic growth of our partners and, of course, our country.
And I hope especially to check the new technologies that are provided by Huawei. We check all these capabilities in order to implement after that in our country.
I spoke with several entrepreneurs from the Latin American region, and they're surprised by China's achievements in digital economy in recent years. How can these achievements be turned into feasible solutions suited to local markets and help promote economic development? Latin America and the Caribbean is the 4th largest regional online market in terms of users worldwide, behind Asia, Europe, and Africa. Huawei says its cloud is the fastest growing in Latin America and has become one of the top 4 clouds.
We deployed our cloud business in Latin America in 2019. Currently, we have local Huawei cloud regions in Brazil, Mexico, and Chile. Through technologies like cloud computing, we can help our Latin American customers accelerate digital transformation and make enterprises future-oriented so that they can seize opportunities to improve efficiency and develop more innovative products.
I believe that there are a lot of good applications, good case studies from China, and even good open source projects from China that can really help other countries, to go, digital transformation.
Experts also noted that talent development will be one of the key challenges for China and Latin American countries. He says that with more professional training and communication, bilateral cooperation will become even closer in the future. Xu Hua, CGTN, Shenzhen, Guangdong Province.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Some people choose electric vehicles because they think they're green, but some scientists beg to differ when it comes to pollution.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. A debate over meat is proving rather difficult to swallow in Italy. Italy could become the first country in the world to ban lab-grown meat, with a new law being debated by Parliament later this month.
But if EU regulators authorise the sale of cultivated meat products in the future, it would contradict the Italian government's position. Our correspondent Alex Fraser reports.
Innovations designed to be a sustainable, low-emission alternative to meat. Chicken cultivated in huge vats in the United States. A giant meatball grown from extinct mammoth DNA in the Netherlands. Both would be banned in Italy if a new law prohibiting the production and marketing of lab-grown meat receives parliamentary approval. Giorgia Meloni's government proposed fines of more than $65,000 for violators, positioning themselves as the defenders of agriculture and a Mediterranean diet.
Critics have accused the Italian government of using this issue as part of a wider culture war, but they have the support of many farmers who feel threatened by the emergence of lab-grown meat.
Italy's farming association Coldiretti has led a campaign against cultured meat, calling it Frankenstein food.
Coldiretti gathered millions of signatures against the production of synthetic food, against the commercialisation and importation of this type of food into our country. We have tried to advise the Minister in drafting the law that will pass Parliament in the coming weeks.
Luigi Gargioni's family have been farming cattle for generations in the northern province of Cremona. He's worried that if it receives EU approval, lab-grown meat would threaten Italian food culture.
The European Union wants to go forward with synthetic meat. Instead, our government are opposing it to defend our Italian excellence and quality that we have in our territory that other countries do not have. Brothers of Italy are on our side.
Like these scientists in Japan, Bruno Cell researches cultivated meat. It's the only startup of its kind in Italy. The bill doesn't ban research in the sector, but researchers argue that Italian innovators will be left behind by rivals in other nations.
For a while, cultivated meat won't be produced in Italy, but from the moment in which the EU will approve the consumption of product based on cultivated meat, then it will be possible to market the product also in Italy. So it's just a way, in our opinion, to prevent Italian companies and researchers to enter this market.
Italians are passionate about their food culture. Meat plays a central part. Will this new law be a case of gastro-nationalism, or is the Italian government justified in protecting farmers and consumers from what they see as an external threat? Alex Fraser, CGTN, Milan.
We need to use less water and stop taking huge quantities out of rivers. That's the message in the United States. Negotiations among 3 U.S. states over water consumption from the Colorado River seem to have been resolved amicably.
California, Arizona and Nevada have agreed to cut their reliance on the drought-ravaged river. Our correspondent Hendrik Sybrandy reports.
For the past few decades, the Colorado River, which supplies drinking water to 40 million Americans and irrigates vast farmland in the southwest U.S., has been under severe stress. Drought, population growth, and climate change have dropped river flows by 1/3 compared to historic averages, making a water and power crisis a real possibility.
That would be catastrophic. No water running in the Grand Canyon, or no water running below Lake Mead to the millions of acres of agriculture. You know, the cities that depend on that water.
On Monday, the lower Colorado Basin states of California, Arizona, and Nevada headed off potential disaster by agreeing to 3.7 million megaliters of water cuts over the next 3 years, or 13% of their river allocation. The federal government will pay the states $1.2 billion in exchange.
I thought it was interesting. It did kind of come, I guess I'd say, a little unexpectedly.
Water expert John Tracy at Colorado State University says the federal government had threatened to impose cuts on states this summer.
We can't continue to use water in the Colorado River unsustainably, and that's what we're doing right now.
University of Colorado's Mark Squillace's March warning came as a wetter and snowier winter than normal was wrapping up.
It's very clear that having a pretty good snow year really helped in terms of avoiding having to make a hard decision this year.
But hard decisions lie ahead for the wider region, the 7 states in the Colorado Basin. A super dry year could upend the new agreement, which runs until 2026. While encouraged by the breakthrough deal, Tracy worries it could hurt the marginalized, the poor.
I'm also hoping that these reductions in water use don't lead to increased costs in water for those groups, because that's just going to drive a higher level of water insecurity for those individuals and communities.
Even before the agreement, Las Vegas, Nevada had taken big steps to conserve water by doing things like banning traditional lawns and capping the size of swimming pools.
We've seen water use decline in our community by greater than 30%, while our population has increased by more than 50%.
The question is, will other places be as aggressive now that a deal is in place?
Is everybody trying to reduce their use by close to 1 million acre-feet a year? Or is it kind of like, oh, we got the water, so we'll do the reductions next year and the next year? I always like to say I was born in Missouri, and so it's the show me state. So I tell you what, just show me, just show me.
For the moment, the critical lakes Mead and Powell, where water has been dropping, have a level of protection.
We have another year of super poor runoff. The agreement itself acknowledges that we could be in that danger zone again.
That danger zone is out of the Colorado River picture, at least for now. Hendrik Sybrandy, CGTN, Denver.
Electric cars could release more toxic tyre particles than petrol vehicles. At least that's according to some scientists. All tyres shed potentially harmful microparticles due to friction with the road. It's a known problem, but EVs are usually heavier due to the weight of their batteries, and that can mean their tyres could wear down more quickly, releasing more particles. Not everyone backs these claims, and there is no suggestion that the release of the particles outweighs fuel emissions from petrol and diesel cars. Well, let's talk to James Tate, Associate Professor at the Institute for Transport Studies, part of the University of Leeds. James, good to see you. Welcome. First of all, help us here. Do EVs produce more tyre and brake particulate pollution than their petrol equivalents because they're heavier, those fat batteries?
Petrol and diesel vehicles, or brake wear, electric vehicles have obviously they have a vacuum sealed electric motor that also works as a dynamo. So in the majority of kind of braking events, only extreme events in EVs do the mechanical brakes kick in. So that's one area where there's a big saving, and there's like reports of, Tesla's doing 250,000 miles on the clock, and they still have the factory fitted brakes and they don't need replacing. So brake wear, not at all. Tyre wear, yes, arguably currently, but what a lot of people don't seem to grasp is quite how quickly electric vehicles are kind of lightweighting. So automotive battery technology is evolving so fast. We're able to get a lot more energy into a smaller and lighter battery, and that's happening year on year. So yeah, arguably, yes, at the moment, but in a few years' time, diesel vehicles particularly, we expect to have kind of weight parity with electric vehicles.
If there is a problem with tyre particulates, I mean, what can be done to improve that? Is that about manufacturers upping their game? Is it about governments writing new legislation? What needs to be done?
Yeah, so tyre technology, there's not been a great deal of legislation around kind of tyre technology, and it's quite a challenging area because obviously there's kind of significant, it's not just about the health from an air pollution point of view, it's also health safety implications as well. So it's not just an environmental decision, but yeah, more needs to be done here. And on roads that have very high levels of activity and vehicle activity, perhaps those roads need to be cleaned on a kind of systematic basis to remove any accumulated particles that could then be resuspended.
There's a huge push around the world, obviously, to go electric, but it's easy to forget, isn't it, the environmental damage of the manufacture of electric cars, shipping the vehicles, tyre pollution we've talked about, coal-fired power stations using to charge them up, the end-of-life disposal. I mean, there is no such thing as a green car, is there?
No, but let's also remember energy systems, power generation in many countries across the world are shifting to renewables very quickly. So yeah, in the UK, we've got a very kind of increasing over 50% share of renewable energy in the electricity grid. So yeah, driving electric vehicles in the UK is becoming an increasingly environmentally conscious decision. More challenges in China. There's lots and lots of electric vehicles, but there's a higher proportion charged from coal-fired power stations there.
James, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on the programme. James Tate, Associate Professor at the Institute for Transport Studies, the University of Leeds.
And finally, 2 ancient shipwrecks have been discovered 1,500 metres underwater in the South China Sea. The vessels are thought to be at least 500 years old. One contains more than 100,000 porcelain relics dating back to the Ming Dynasty. The joint discovery is one of China's major deep-sea finds. Archaeologists say that the wrecks provide significant clues about ancient maritime Silk Road trade routes.
The headlines again. UK inflation falls below double figures for the first time since August, but food prices continue to rise at the fastest rate in 45 years. Our other headlines: Russia vows a harsh response to attacks on its Belgorod region as both Ukraine and the United States deny any involvement. And fighter jets and clashes reported in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, on the second day of a new ceasefire. And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
There's more on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, it's goodbye.